Good evening and welcome to the Cedar Falls, City of Cedar Falls Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for December 12th, 2018. Ms. Howard, could we have the roll?
Atkins?
Here.
Hartley?
Here.
Girusso?
Here.
Oberly is absent. Holst?
Here.
Leeper?
Here.
Wingert?
Here.
Saul?
Here.
And Larson. I'd like to introduce our newest Planning and Zoning Commissioner. Mr. Carl Larson joins us tonight for his first meeting of his 5-year term.
Okay.
Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you.
Welcome, Kyle. Appreciate having you. First item of business, if there's any public comments tonight on any item that's not on the agenda. No comments from the public. Seeing none, we'll move on to old business. We have one item of old business, and that's the College Hill Neighborhood Overlay District site plan review.
Did you do the minutes?
Oh, I'm sorry. I did not do the minutes. Thank you. Let's, we need the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That is approved. Now we will get on to old business. The College Hill Neighborhood Overlay District site plan review, 2119 College Street. And we have an introduction on that, David?
Thank you, Mr. Holtz. Yeah, last meeting on November 28th, we brought this item to Commission for introduction. And I got to get back to the front of the slideshow here. So I wanted to bring this back to discussion here for project location at 2119 College Street. It's located near the northwest corner of College and 22nd Street. And I did lay out some letters in front of you here that were received here the last few days. So if you have a minute, take a look at those. But those came from the public in the College Hill area. So again, this property is located at 2119 College Street in the C3 Commercial District. And here's a site plan that shows a building up front along College with parking, and behind there's 2 lots back there with parking. And last time we kind of went over the tables with what the current submittal was. It has a breakdown of studio units, 2-bedroom and 4-bedroom for a total of 31 units. And that equates into 47 bedrooms and 47 parking stalls. So as you can see how that changed from the first submittal and the second submittal to what we have now for this project. Just moving along, and this is just a summary of current sections of our zoning ordinance in the College Hill overlay within the commercial districts. Kind of outlines how the commercial areas are developed. Want to maintain that commercial area or ground floor space for those types of uses. And it does encourage residential uses on the upper floors. There may be some cases that maybe the whole thing is residential use on the main floor, but that's something we'd want to discourage and maintain that commercial use. So basically it says those residential uses can be contained within that commercial building, and it's considered an accessory or secondary use. And then just moving along in that same section of the code, the overlay district for the parking, it talks about the parking for that area is not required for those upper floor residential units. This site does have 47 parking stalls that is located behind the building. So just moving along with renderings, it's pretty much the same building like we've seen in the past. Really the only change is we looked at the east elevation there facing College Street there on the right-hand side of the screen. They moved the main entrance to the commercial space to the southeast corner of the building, and that basically provides pretty much at-grade access to the sidewalk area, so that kind of improves that point. And then the sidewalk does drop a few feet, a couple feet as you head to the north corner of that building. So we wanted to make sure that access is adequate in that location, so they did move that there down in the southeast corner. And then here is the northeast perspective facing on College Street, and then a perspective of the building in the back, as you're in the parking lot area. Looking at materials, it's mostly brick and metal panels. The openings are the doorways and the windows. And the metal panels consist of a vertical design with a dark charcoal color, and the horizontal design of, lighter grays, and then you got the 2 different brick details on that. Has a breakdown of percentages. Just kind of looking at building heights and nearby structures. Mostly they're contained on the university in that area. So as you can see that comparison with other structures along 23rd Street and in the dormitories. And then this is kind of a cross section along College Street as you're at the south end at 23rd. Of course, it's a little bit higher in elevation and kind of makes that comparison to those buildings there along the west side of College Street. So kind of in a summary for this site plan, it's a 5-story building, approximately 61.5 feet tall. Mostly the surrounding structures are 1 to 2 stories, but again, those other structures in the university area, the campus, and on 23rd is a little bit taller. The setbacks are not required for the C3 district, but there is 5 foot along College Street. There's a 5-foot utility easement basically behind the sidewalk area, and then 5 foot along the south line, and this is from the building, 6 foot along the north. I want to go into details of the landscaping, the trash enclosure. This is the landscaping plan. Parking lot meets all the setbacks for that area. You can see the adequate amount of trees, shrubs, and perennials that provide that nice screening around all sides of the parking lot. The trash dumpster is located in the northwest corner of the parking lot, and that's going to be a brick enclosure to match the materials in the building. The building is going to drain from the south from 22nd to the north, and it's going to be detained in an underground detention basin, and that will make its way over to College Street in those storm sewers. There's some bike racks in the back of the building, which is pretty much your main entrance for your tenant areas, and then there's a front entrance for the tenants. It's kind of in a lobby area, and then they can go upstairs. Some bike racks in line with those existing tree grates. There is a driveway approach existing now, and that will be removed and replaced with the pavers to match everything. And then there's going to be a new tree grate added on the south end, so there would be a series of 3 tree grates and trees there. So with that in mind, we would like to recommend approval of this project at 2119 College Street based on staff recommendations. We did kind of come up, and I think this was brought up a little bit at the last meeting, is trying to make sure those parking stalls stay with the development. So we're drafting that parking lot covenants, developmental agreement, not really developmental agreement, but agreement to kind of look at the maintenance and maintaining those parking stalls for this building. And then along with that, probably some other maintenance factors with snow removal, trash removal, and because there's some other amenities to the site. So that'll be included in that. We're looking at that. We're putting that together. We want to get it to the developer, and that will go with the site plan as it goes to council, city council. We did the same thing like we did for the 200 First Street project, so we just kind of want to carry that through for this one. And then any comments that the commission members have. And
Thanks, David. Yeah. This time I'd invite the applicant if they'd like to give any additional information or update. No? Okay, thanks, Brent. Then we'll move on to open for public comment, and I would invite anybody who'd like to address the commission on this item to come forward to the microphone and give your name and address.
Greetings. My name is Kamyar Enshayan, 1703 Washington Street. I'm a board member of the College Hill Partnership, and I'm the president of the board. And our board has reviewed this proposal and very much favors approval. We appreciate your approval of this. I have worked here in Cedar Falls for 25 years, lived and walked by College Hill. And so here, over the last few years, we've had one developer that single-handedly has helped revitalize the commercial district of the College Hill. And we're very pleased with everything that has gone on over the last few years. And this is a new, one additional thing. And the board has already approved that. So you've received a letter in support of this development by the board members of the College Hill Partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamyar. Anyone else who would like to address the commission?
Ishan Vajpayee, 3831 Convair Lane, and I guess I'll start my comments with a question to see if I can expedite my comments. I know that previously on this issue, Mr. Wingert has recused himself and announced that recusal, and I just wonder if that is going to happen again or if I need to address that as part of my comments.
You can address it as part of your comments.
Okay, well, I'll start by addressing it as part of my comments that previously Mr. Wingert has recused himself from a vote on this site plan because, well, for reasons unknown to me, but nothing since that prior recusal and now has changed to my knowledge. I previously sent by letter on March 27th, 2018, a letter and documents proving that Mr. Wingert and Mr. Dahlstrom, principal owner of the entity that is applying for this site plan, are partners in a Panther Farms business and have outstanding mortgages jointly signed together of about $7.5 million. And Panther Builders, where they're partners, have outstanding mortgages where they're jointly indebted for about $10 million. I presented lots of information that Mr. Wingert in his real estate business sells millions and millions of dollars of real estate for Mr. Dahlstrom, and that this clearly constitutes a conflict of interest above and beyond a simple issue of a realtor having some marginal involvement with a local real estate developer. Frankly, I think if this were to be passed through with Mr. Wingert's vote being the deciding vote, it'd be a poison pill to this project if it were to be litigated based on the court precedents about what a conflict of interest is. Moving on to the project itself, I'm trying to think of new ways to present this as it's been talked about so much, but I guess what I want to say is to understand why this scenario is contrary to the strict code language, the intent of the code to provide adequate parking, and common sense. Consider this. Under staff's interpretation, a building may be proposed with 4 floors of residential space, starting from the ground floor all the way up. No commercial space, but it contains 23 studio apartments, 8 2-bedroom apartments, and 4 4-bedroom apartments. Under the code, simply because of the lack of commercial space, this would require 75 parking spots. Now, you may have noticed that this is the exact residential layout of the site plan today, put forth today. But this building, built next door, slide that commercial spot in, and according to staff, that means it goes from 75 parking spot requirement to 0. And I know 47 are being proposed, but their view is it's still 0. Their view is if you came forward with 35, it'd be okay. 20 would be okay. 0 would be okay. There's no differences between these two buildings in terms of the parking requirements, the number of people coming through those buildings, the number of people visiting, except the one with the commercial space that requires no parking would actually have to accommodate customers to the commercial space and employees of the commercial space, in addition to all the units stacked on top of it. And this, I submit, boggles the mind. Will there be less traffic in and out of the second building? No. Will there be fewer residents and fewer visitors at that parking? No. The fact that these two buildings could be treated so differently based on this one element is wholly illogical. It's simply a loophole catering to certain types of buildings that we just heard are being built by one developer. And we know that parking is an issue in this town. It's a hot issue in this town. Just had a forum about a parking problem on Main Street where we had business owners state that they're losing lots of money, and they think it's because of inadequate parking, a parking shortage caused by lots of residential buildings going up with not enough parking. And if the parking regulations had been adequately applied downtown, or more strictly applied downtown, maybe we wouldn't have that mess. And I just really caution against us creating that problem in another part of town. I know that everyone wants this empty lot, this dirt lot on the hill filled. And the building looks great to me. I mean, aesthetically, it looks great. And I know that there's a lot of enthusiasm for this project and a lot of enthusiasm for increased density, but it's got to follow the law. This building is scaled down, but parking's also been removed since the last proposal. The last proposal only parked 48% required by code. This proposal parks it 62%, not even close to 100%. It completely ignores the requirement that studio apartments are supposed to have 2 spots per bedroom. It completely ignores the fact that it requires guest parking over a certain number of units. Why is this allowed? Why will this be allowed? The responsibility of this commission is not to rubber stamp staff. It's to vote based on the code and your common sense interpretation of the code. And in this scenario, it doesn't take a lawyer to figure this out. 4 stories of residential stacked on 1 story of commercial is not the secondary use. As I said before, on the recusal issue, and even on this issue, if it were to be passed through, I don't think this would stand a court challenge. This building could be fully parked. Prior site plans included underground parking that would provide nearly all of the missing parking, but that underground parking has been withdrawn. They could further scale the building down, but we've never heard why they won't. The bottom line is the city wants this building, and they'll come up with any way to justify its construction. I'm sorry that's a blunt assertion, but at this point, 3-4 times up in front of this commission, not backing away from this logical fallacy, I can draw no other conclusion. For those who previously voted against the site plan, similar site plan, please vote no again, because nothing has changed to bring this plan back into conformity with the code. For those who previously voted for the site plan, I urge you to consider. I know there's thoughts here that this is some sort of a gray area, but if there's a gray area, why lean toward the side of underparking? Why not err on the side of adequate parking? Vote this down, send everyone back to the drawing board to clarify these mixed-use buildings, clarify the gray area, and make it so that the first building I described is treated equally to the second building I described. That's one of the biggest things here, equal treatment amongst buildings. The bottom line is that a continued vote in favor of this site plan will not be based on the code, but in honesty, I think it's based on your personal preference and desire to see a particular building built, whether it violates the code or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Others who would like to address the commission, please come forward and state your name and address.
Hello, my name's Dave Deibler. Thanks for letting me speak this evening. I live over on Campus Street with my wife. We own a couple buildings on College Hill. So I'm not only involved in the business aspect of it, I live up there. I would say I'm probably up there more than anybody in this room on a daily basis. I overwhelmingly support this project. I think it's a good compromise. I think it's needed. I think it looks good. Being at the bottom of the hill with the height, I think it makes sense. I'm concerned about parking, and I guess I would, collecting my thoughts here, but we need a parking study on College Hill, and we need it very soon, because there's a lot of conjecture about what's going on up there. I don't see a parking problem. We have a very young demographic, and obviously there's some businesses that have older clientele, but I don't see the issue, and I think we know this building does meet code, and is the code a little vague? Okay, yeah, maybe it is, but this is a reasonable project. And it doesn't really matter, like when I say College Hill really needs something like this, but we do really need something like that. And I think we've gotten ourselves into a little bit of a strange position where I mean, it almost seems like there's a certain aspect of this community that wants no residential on College, on that main block there. And that's unacceptable to me. That's not the vision. I don't think any era of Cedar Falls government or the partnership, anybody has had that vision that we want to lock it in time and keep it where it's at. So just to finish up, I really support it, and I hope you'll move it on to City Council. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave.
Dr. Sires, 1939 College Street. I like this proposal, actually. I mean, I want to congratulate Brett Dahlstrom. I think he's worked hard to try to meet what is believed to be the code, and he's built beautiful buildings, and I think he's a very good developer. The one thing that I think is being missed is that the city parking code is never actually mentioned. Everybody mentions the College Hill overlay, but 29177 is the actual parking code, and it's held to be the minimum requirements for parking in the city. College Hill overlay says that where there's a conflict between anything in the overlay and another regulation affecting it, the more stringent or the more restrictive applies. So you have to go to 29177 to actually see what's going on. And in that, there's a universe of parking. There's parking that's on site, and there's parking that's not on site. In 29177, and I think possibly in the College Hill overlay, it says that for commercial spaces in the C3 zoning area, on-site parking is exempted. And so also is secondary residential above principal commercial in the C3 overlay. But it says on-site. It doesn't say all parking is exempted. And I think that that's the mistake that's been made by the city. They thought that on-site parking was the entire universe of parking, but it's only the type of parking that's on-site. Now, this one has on-site parking. I mean, I think he's made a heroic effort to meet the requirements, and I think he's close even with stringent requirements. But my only point is that the mistake that has fundamentally been made is that not all parking is exempted. And the reason I make the point is really not for this development, which looks very nice. It's because we've run into this problem of what happens if 120 feet in height of building is allowed on College Street. What happens to those 10 or 11 stories of residential that requires no parking? And a developer of a certain mind might say, hey, it doesn't require any parking. That's where the real problem comes. It's what's coming down the line. And my single point is parking is required. And if you look at 29177, and I have the regulation over here, it is only exempting on-site parking. And for the off-site parking, it states that it has to be within a reasonable distance. The other thing 29177 does say is how do you compute parking for any type of use? And it goes through nursing homes and beauty shops and dog grooming things and everything you can think of. And it then finally comes to joint or mixed uses. And we've all been struggling with what to do with mixed-use buildings. And the regulation in 29177, which is the parking regulation of the city of Cedar Falls, says that all uses in a building need to be parked. The residential uses need to be calculated, and it shows how to calculate them, and the commercial uses need to be calculated, and it shows how to park them. And then in 177B number 4, it says for a mixed use, it's the sum of those two. So that's what the actual code says. I'm for building something on this site. I'm not for a 10 or 12-story building that, again, has no parking requirement. And I think the problem, you know, Mr. Dahlstrom built a beautiful place, 3 stories on, I don't know if it's Olive Street, and it's gorgeous. You know, it's smaller in scale. And so I just think there's that aspect to it. That's where the mistake has been made, and I think a Planning and Zoning Commission needs to look at that, because that's where the fundamental problem is. Then I just have one other little point, and that is, I don't think the city should wholesale go about changing their zoning codes to favor certain types of developments. You ran into problems downtown where somehow the parking is gone, and those businesses that worked so hard to bring the parkade back from ruin have lost their parking, and they're losing money. I mean, it's like you're killing the goose that laid the golden egg. So I would urge you not to just change all the rules, but rather rescale how people think about things and leave enough parking for others. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Sires. Others who would like to address the commission on this item?
Hello, Jerry Geisler, 4412 South Hudson Road, Cedar Falls. I sent you a note today, basically disregarded, except the most important part of it is, if you'll look at the bottom of the first page, it talks about the density that I've had in my 1-bedroom apartments over the last couple of years. And it shows you that in the last 2 years, I've had 1 3/4 cars per 1-bedroom apartment. This is the way that it has been for probably the last 20 years. I've been at this since 1992, and I know what happens in a 1-bedroom apartment. You do not get one person with 1 car time after time, day after day in a 1-bedroom apartment. Some years you'll get maybe 50% of them have 2 people. Some years you'll get 100% of them have 2 people with 2 cars. So my point is that we need to be looking at more parking stalls for the 1-bedroom units that are being proposed. If we don't, we're going to end up with the same problem we had back in 1992 when we first started with this big mess up there. We've cured it. It's cost me a lot of money. Believe me, it's cost me a lot of money for the parking that I put in. But I don't want to have to go back again and put in parking. For the bars, right now, I own the house right next door to where Mr. Dahlstrom is proposing his project. Well, if you'll come with me some night, and I've invited you before and none of you have taken me up on it, but when I end up with the phone call from my tenants telling me that someone has stolen their parking stall, I get very irate about having to provide parking for the bars and for the urban flats and everything else that I'm not supposed to be providing the parking for, but I am providing the parking for. And my parking lot can only hold 3 or 4 more cars. I don't know what they're going to do with the rest of the cars from the people that have 2 people per 1-bedroom apartment with 2 cars. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
Hi, I'm Becky Hawbaker, 2309 Iowa Street. So I've lived in Cedar Falls most of my life, and I also serve on the College Hill Partnership, representing residents and neighbors. So I've come to a lot of these hearings for the previous projects, and I think that everyone you've heard from tonight has spoken in the same position multiple times. So I'm coming to you today as someone who has changed her mind. As a neighbor, I was concerned about parking. I was concerned about the scale of the project. This isn't a 10 or 12 scale or story development. This is a 47-bedroom unit with 47 parking spots. I think it is a fair and equitable and reasonable compromise. I think this development is needed on the Hill, and I think that it is fairly parked. I think that this developer has bent over backwards to try to work with the partnership and with the city to meet the concerns that have been levied, and I urge you to approve it. Thank you.
Anyone else who would like? Yeah, please come forward and state your name and address.
Hi, I'm Andy Footman. I live at 422 North Ellen Street, and then we have Sidecar Coffee at 2215 College. So I'm just really happy to be there at Sidecar Coffee, and my big note is that Sidecar Coffee would be illegal if they had to put 2 parking spots per bedroom there. And not only has the coffee shop been really great, in my life, but I hope we've been a positive part of the community here. And I would hope that you guys, as the guiding voices, would look for opportunities to put more things in place that have that same effect. And I really feel like, as I'm doing business up there, that this proposed building would do just that. So that's it. Thanks.
Anyone else who would like to address the commission?
Good afternoon, or evening. My name is John Tiber. I'm at 250 State, which is downtown, and I wanted to dispel some of these parking representations that have been made that the residents are causing the problems, because I take a little bit of offense to that, particularly what I see every day in our development down there. And I'm so happy that this product is available in Cedar Falls that wasn't ever available at the quality that we're talking about, new construction, multifamily residential. I look out at a lot that's no more than 50% parked at max at any time of the day, morning, night, during the day. And to say that residents are the problem, that really isn't the case. The case has been that he was required to put in, or the developers have been required to put in parking. It's not getting used. Could have been developed with more taxable value, and we're not seeing that. And I guess what I'd like to say on College Hill, this idea of 1 3/4 per unit, I think is changing. I mean, people's preferences, where you want to be, the walkability, all those things we value in a community, the reason why C3 zoning exists in the first place. These places where you want to be don't have parking. Ironically, they don't have parking. And the reason is they don't create these dead zones as we're seeing in downtown and other places. So I'd encourage you to think forward rather than backwards. Times are changing, consumer preferences are changing. We should invite these projects into our community in the C3 zoned areas of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any others who would like to address the commission?
Kyle Demlow, 2113 Vera Way. Just wanted to make a couple points. I've worked on College Hill since 2006. Any type of the day, there's going to be different parking scenarios up there. But the one that's a constant, and I think what a lot of people look at as far as parking when they look at where it's the most busy, is behind the Urban Flats building where Ginger's used to be, that back parking lot behind Sidecar. I don't think anyone takes the time to look at the parking lot that's across the street, and there's actually 2, and they're empty all the time. And there's one big difference. That's metered, and the one behind Urban Flats is not. That's a huge difference, because you can go there for 2 hours and not pay anything and not get a ticket, where all the tickets are written at, or where the meters are at, because it's very easy to see if somebody goes after 2 hours. That's a pretty big thing. And then the other parking lot that's right there on 22nd and Olive, where there's a house used to be, that's empty all the time. And when we talk about the bars and a couple things like that, I mean, after 5 o'clock, you can park on both sides of the street. You can't do that during the day. It rotates every day. But I thought that's a pretty good point to bring up, because every time I talk to somebody about parking, they're always gravitating towards, behind Sidecar. And the other big thing about that is if you go and look at it, that's the closest to the campus as well. So that's where students park when they go to class. And they can do it without getting a parking pass from the UNI. They can do it for free, not even pay the 50 cents on the meters if they would have had to bind the OP and Social House. I mean, I've seen some of you up there. I've seen you guys park very close to exactly where the building you're going to. So I just want to give that perspective because I know a lot of the time the focus is gravitated to one of the 3 parking lots that we have up there. But if we're talking about how much parking is an issue, I mean, when everyone says 50%, I mean, Dave's up there every day, I'm up there every day. I know, and Andy's up there every day. And it's the back behind my business, so it's open all the time. And I encourage any one of you guys to go up there on any given day and take a look. I think you'll be surprised. Thanks.
Thank you. Further comments? Seeing none, I will close the public comment on this at this time and offer to the applicant if you want to respond to any of the comments or anything.
I'll just wait for any questions.
Okay, thanks, Brent. Well, at this time, we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and any motion.
I'll clear up the direction that came at me. I made a personal choice not to discuss and communicate on the last time. It was our city staff's attorney that I did not need to abstain. And I made that choice last time, and I'm making another choice this time.
Thank you, Mr. Winger.
Well, I'll start us off, I guess. It's a complicated issue, and Karen, can you tell me how old this code is?
How old the code is?
Yeah, approximately.
You know, I don't know how many times it's been amended or how many, you know, the overlay's been in place for some time. And I know it's been amended at least once. David, you might have more of a history of the actual code language that's there now. But
It's old.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Okay.
old, and it's,
So I see people on both sides of this issue pointing to the code and making legitimate kind of arguments one way or the other. I guess as I look at it, I guess the way that I look at it is that the code wasn't meant for and maybe envisioned a project of this density. And it's an issue that we've been facing as a city, both on Main Street and College Hill. And that to me requires some interpretation. We're working hard to clean that up, but it does require some interpretation in my mind. And I feel like we're getting close on that, and the developer's done a good job of working through that. It's been a very difficult process, and one that requires some patience, I know, from everyone. So we're working through it, and I personally support the project because I think it's a good balance of where we're going and where we're going to be. Density, from my perspective, is a good thing. I have a son going to the University of Iowa first year, and he chose not to take a car because of density. So density can impact where we're going, and I think it's going to. It's a big change from where we are, but I think it's moving the city in the right direction.
I think the proposal the way it is now is a good proposal. I like, you've done a good job trying to address all the concerns. The only thing I have a little question on is timing, because I also believe that the way the code is written right now, this doesn't meet the code the way it's written. I know the staff doesn't think that, but I guess as long as I've been on the commission, everything, and the way I read it, there's a problem with that parking. And so it's important to me, though, that whatever we pass, whatever we apply, applies to everybody. And I think the item we're talking about next addresses that. And I'm just kind of wondering if we should be taking care of that first, because we've spent a lot of years talking about this and going back and forth. And if we can bring, some sort of resolution that then it just seems like it's out of order. We ought to take care of this piece where we're looking at changing the regulation and then come back and pass this. But I see the project is fine the way it is right now, and I don't know, it's a timing issue. I don't know what Brent's timing is and the timing of this, but to me, it would be preferable. I support where it's going, but I just think we ought to, one step at a time, we ought to change the regulation so the regulation applies to everybody, and then, you know, the project can be approved accordingly. That's kind of how I feel about the process. I think we're, but I don't know.
Can we get the developer to address the timing of the project?
Brent Dahlstrom, 5016 Samantha Circle. I'd like to first thank Dr. Cyrus for the kind comments, and can understand it's hard when we're landlords, and same as Mr. Vashpe, landlords in town, and competition makes it so it's just, it's just difficult, right? It's a difficult position to be in. I can respect their position. So we've had patience to get this far. I think that if you, I would have been surprised if you didn't table it tonight, Mr. Holst. And, so I fully expected that. It wasn't my intent to bring this at the same time as the zoning clarification, so it just happened to be where the city staff went after that. So if you'd like to table it while we clear up that issue, fully understand that and fully understand that.
Yeah, so my question would be, I mean, was there a timing issue that, you know, if you don't get it past this, you know, I'm assuming you're probably not looking at construction until spring at the earliest, so
right.
You would have some time to get one thing passed before another thing is addressed, if I don't know how you feel about that.
Timing is valuable, but at the same time, if we're talking about making a revision to the code, that's important to continue the hill moving forward. Be happy to table it for tonight and bring it back at the next meeting, if that would be acceptable to you.
You know, somebody's going to have to make a motion. I'm just emceeing tonight.
I would move to table.
I second.
Is there a further discussion?
I would like to make one clarification, that there was some accusations laid out that the city is serving one particular developer. And I can tell you that that's not true. We are wrestling with a different level of development, and I hope you know that everyone up here is doing what we think is in the best interest of the city of Cedar Falls, which is why we're volunteering our time to do this. And I don't think those accusations are fair. Last comment.
Thank you. Yeah, I just echo what Brad's saying. I think, you know, the point earlier on is this code's been around for a long time, and it's been, you know, bootstrapped this and that on for a long time, and things get kind of wonky. And you know, I think we haven't envisioned this type of development, and I don't think our code really reflects that. And so, you know, having to do a little revisions now and then, I think is important to do that. So,
I would also like to state that our jobs as commissioners is to vote based on the code, and I believe, as has been presented, that it doesn't meet code. And so until we do our job to change it, it just doesn't seem prudent to go ahead and I love the project, to go ahead and vote the project through without meeting code as it's currently written. So that's why I agree with tabling.
okay, any further discussion? There's a motion to table this item. We'll go ahead and vote.
Excuse me, are you deferring it to the next meeting or tabling it? You want to have it on the next meeting, correct? For consideration at the next meeting, or this
So
just
if we
would continue the item to the next, so it would be on the agenda and give full notice to the public that it will be continued to be on the agenda? Is that correct?
That's a good question. Well, will our next item be moved on, do you think, at that point?
Well, what you can do is continue to defer it. What deferring it means is that you'll have a discussion at the next meeting, and it gives notice to the public that
Gotcha,
it's
yes.
being deferred to your January.
So we need to clarify our motion. Who made the motion?
I made the motion.
That's right, Deb did.
And I made to table it until we had a chance to make changes to the code, so that we would have a clear code to vote on.
So by tabling it, that could be indefinitely until the commission would bring it back, correct?
What you're really saying is we're moving to defer it.
The deferring it would be a date certain so that it would keep it on the agenda. Otherwise, we will have to reintroduce it, so.
It's up to you, Deb. You made the motion.
I move to
Table
table
it.
it until we.
Okay, so the motion is to table it, which means it will not necessarily be on the next meeting. We'd bring it back once the code item has been, it would be the intent, and it's been seconded. Is there any other questions? Otherwise, we will go ahead and vote. Yeah.
I think you voted for Hillary,
Oh, yes, I did.
so you abstained.
Abstaining, yes. So we have 4 nays, so that, and 3 yeses, so that does not pass.
I would make a motion that we defer it to the.
I second.
We have a motion and a second to defer. Is there any further discussion?
Does that include public comment or no?
No. We'll go ahead and vote again.
To defer.
So we have all yeses on that, so it will be deferred till the next meeting. Thank you.
Just to clarify then, at that meeting, you can make another decision.
Right.
Based on what's discussed at that meeting, what you want to do at that meeting.
Right. Very good. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate all the comments. We will move.
At the end, make sure they know the next meeting is in January.
Move to our next agenda item, if I can get back there. Under new business tonight, we have a zoning code text amendments, proposed changes to section 29160 College Hill Neighborhood Overlay Zoning District to define and clarify standards for mixed-use buildings. And Karen, is that you?
Yeah, I'll take this one.
Thank you.
All right, so related to the last conversation, we know that there's been a lot of confusion about this code. We talked about it the last time there was a project proposed on the same site. There's clearly a difference of opinion about what the code requirements are, and so staff is bringing forward at least an interim solution to just clarify what the parking requirements are for a mixed-use building. So the goal with these zoning code text amendments is fairly modest. There may be additional work that needs to be done on the Hill, just like there's a parking study being conducted in downtown right now, which we still haven't gotten the full results of that. And then just for full knowledge, the city is looking at to move right into the College Hill area and do a parking study in College Hill. So there is support for that, from what I understand from the administration and from City Council. So more to come on more parking studies for these mixed-use areas in the city. So the goal with these zoning code amendments is to establish clear and objective standards in the code to facilitate consistent review of development in the College Hill Overlay District. These are intended to further the existing goals that we have in the comprehensive plan for the College Hill Business District, which are to improve pedestrian access, spur local development of more mixed-use storefronts with apartment dwellings above, and link the upper hill and lower hill along College Street into a more cohesive, walkable area. So once again, recognizing that these may just be interim measures, and after the parking study is complete, we may decide that they need to be further tweaked, and we can discuss at that time. It's important to study setting the parking requirements at the right level for this urban district where the land costs are higher, and there's a desire to use the land more efficiently to create a more walkable area with a Main Street character that sets it apart from the auto-centric areas in the community. That is clearly the goal. It's talked about in the comprehensive plan. There's numerous support, lots of support for that, those goals. So just talking about parking in general, I think we've heard a lot of the benefits of parking. People like to have parking available where they're going to businesses, and parking available for the residents of an area or for employees of an area. But there's not been a lot of discussion about the hidden costs of setting aside land for parking that perhaps is not needed. So this goes to the importance of setting the parking at the right level. The cost of setting aside land for parking is it does lose that valuable land that could otherwise be used for active and revenue generating uses. Parking that sits vacant much of the time is a cost to development, and which translates directly into higher residential rents and higher lease rates for businesses. So if you need the parking, that's great, but if you don't need it and it sits empty, that's a cost to the whole community. Large surface parking lots interrupt what otherwise might be a more pleasant and comfortable place to walk, with buildings close to the street, clustered together, creating a walkable Main Street character that's attractive to visitors and customers. So parking lots, particularly empty parking lots, create a real dead zone in a business district like College Hill. High parking requirements may discourage redevelopment in the College Hill area, where available land for development is limited, and there's a desire for reinvestment and revitalization. It also discourages walking and biking when businesses and housing are spread out over a larger area, making it more time-consuming and unpleasant to walk to different destinations within the area. So I think we need to weigh both the benefits and the costs and getting the parking balanced within the College Hill district. So the code amendments that are before you today delete the ambiguous and confusing language that's caused so much anxiety here at the commission and for the community and for developers. It's very confusing. So deleting the language in the code that's about secondary and principal uses and accessory uses in a mixed-use building. So setting that aside and deleting that from the ordinance, because as you say, the buildings have gotten larger, and so we're not talking about the mom and pop shop anymore with somebody living above it. We're talking about larger mixed-use buildings. So defining what a mixed-use building is, and you can see that on the screen here, this is the definition, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about that, but basically it's a building that's designed for occupancy by a minimum of 2 different uses. Uses generating visitor or customer traffic, such as retail, restaurants, and personal services, are typically located on the ground floor facing the street, and uses generating limited pedestrian activity, such as office or residential uses, are typically located on the upper floors or behind street-fronting commercial uses. So just keep in mind, this is the definition, it's not the regulation. So this could apply to a lot of different places and situations. So in the College Hill overlay, there's also a section about the parking requirements. So establishing parking requirements then for a mixed-use building, and considering that all the uses in the building are principal uses of the building. The ground floor commercial use is clearly a principal use of a building, and the upper floor residential apartments are also a principal use of the building. So establishing parking standards for residential at 1 parking space per bedroom, but not less than 1 parking space per unit. That means that for those efficiency units, we don't have to define what an efficiency unit is, but it sets a minimum level there for every unit having at least 1 parking space. So all the unit sizes are treated the same. It creates a very simple calculation for the building as a whole. We don't have to start talking about different types of units. And we just cautioned that this ratio may still be too high for this urban setting, but we need the parking study to be able to determine that. I know that the first returns on the parking study in the downtown area, what it's showing is the parking requirement that we have applied to, for example, River Place, is showing that it's oversupplied. The parking is oversupplied for the residential at about 40%. So we recognize that College Hill may have a slightly different parking demand than downtown. So I think we need to get the parking study to really determine whether, but in the interim, this is a good place to start, staff feels like, and then when we do the parking study, we can figure out if that's still too high or if it's too low, we can tweak that ratio. This eliminates the requirement for visitor parking. Public parking is a resource that can be more efficiently shared in response to fluctuating demand for visitors. And I think there's 150 public parking spaces on the Hill right now. I think as some of the testimony tonight, a lot of those public parking spaces are sitting empty much of the time. So staff really feels like there's plenty of visitor parking here within a half block of the commercial district. And this then establishes the same parking standards for multiple dwelling units. So this speaks to the issue of fairness that's been discussed, that if you have multiple dwelling units and a multiple dwelling building in the College Hill area, it's a fairly small area, the parking ratio really should be similar. The parking demand is probably similar to what the demand is in these mixed-use buildings. So that levels that playing field. Then, in addition to the parking standards, there are quite a few building design standards in the College Hill overlay, and so by defining mixed-use building, the intent is not to allow those buildings not to have any design standards. So what we tried to do is look at the design standards that applied to the multiple dwelling units and for commercial buildings, and then apply something similar to mixed-use buildings. We also looked to the recent design standards that were just adopted in the downtown area for storefronts and used parallel language with these amendments for mixed-use buildings. And then there were some just minor cleanup items that we noticed as we were reading through the ordinance. Some things were redundant, and some things, as you recall, there were some changes to the terminology for residential uses probably about 6 months ago with some state law changes. For some reason, there were a few things in the College Hill overlay district language that were not changed at that time. So we're just going to clean those definitional issues up, this amendment. So at this time, the Community Development Department recommends discussing the proposed amendments and setting a date for public hearing for the January 9th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Be happy to answer any questions that you have.
What about, one of the things that I think is important is in the C3 zoned portion that there'd be no residential on a ground floor. Do we have anything in, is that
So that
addressed?
language, I believe, stays in the code as written.
And that's the way it is now, right? Am I recollecting that correctly?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yes. So even though the definition itself allows a mixed-use building to be either what they call horizontally or vertically demised, there may be situations where you'd want to allow that. In the College Hill district, it's not. It's stated in the regulations that it's not.
Yeah, because I'm always worried about is that one storefront that now can't get rented, and somebody decides they're going to stick up an apartment into it, right on the main drag, which is not good, so.
You talk about this being interim until there's a parking study done. When is a parking study set for the College Hill overlay?
It's up to the city council to decide that, but I think the idea is that we'll see how the finished product is supposed to finish up in the downtown area at the end of January or February. And I think the idea then is to move right into studying the College Hill area after that.
So technically, if we moved this forward and we changed it to 1 car per bedroom, if we do not get the parking study and this does not come back up again, then that's ordinance, that's code. And so how many projects could technically come through before we?
Well, I think anytime you may say it's temporary, but it's not, it's permanent.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime we change a code, it's
permanent.
Yeah, it'll be permanent until it's changed.
That's my question.
You're saying, but you're anticipating that there may be some adjusting in the future because of
Well,
what's coming up.
I think that's an idea that perhaps we need to be more nimble about adjusting the code language when it's needed.
Right.
And maybe that's been somewhat of the problem, is just having the time and taking the effort to amend the code when it needs to be amended. And obviously this has been on the books for some time.
Now, this is just for the College Hill overlay. It's not C3 district. It doesn't apply downtown. So, but there is a vision to amend those codes after a parking study?
Right. We didn't want to touch the downtown situation because it's right in the middle of the study right now. And I think the study is about the supply of public parking and sharing the public parking in the downtown area. So it's a study of the whole parking supply as a whole. Because in a downtown urban setting like that, you get the most efficient use of your parking if you're managing a public parking system versus trying to decide how much private off-street parking is needed for every use. Because what happens then is it's difficult to predict that, and then you're setting aside land that may not be used for other things. And so generally, in a downtown area, you're doing it with a shared public parking system. And I think what's being studied is to look at how can we manage the public parking system better? Do we need additional public parking for the downtown area? And the one parking requirement that we do have in the books is for residential, and that's the way it's been interpreted in the past, and whether that parking ratio is set at the right ratio or not. I mean, those are all the kinds of questions being asked about downtown. So we didn't want to change anything in the code here before that parking study was finished. So this is clearly just focused on College Hill at the moment.
No, go ahead.
Can you go ahead and outline the process for, let's say this does go through, what that step to get it back in the parking study that I would venture to guess, based on my experience, everybody else's experience that's on that hill on a regular basis, will come back and show that there's not a parking problem on the hill, especially knowing that that's showing up even in the downtown area. What's the process to get that change started and amended if it does go one-to-one bedroom?
So what I would anticipate with a parking study is that there'll be a set of recommendations that come out of a parking study.
Okay.
And that set of recommendations would then include adjustments to code language if necessary.
And who initiates that?
So the consultant that would be hired to do the parking study would be working with the community and doing the study and then coming up with a set of recommendations. And then, of course, it's really up for the city then to initiate those, implementing those recommendations.
So I have another question, and regarding this 29177, where it covers all parking, not just off-site and on-site. We are just amending 29160, or we're proposing to amend that. Then how does that fit in with 29177?
So what we've done is we took the language in the overlay, and overlays typically supersede the base zone regulations. And we've made it very clear that there's specific parking requirements stated in the overlay for different types of uses. And we've made a statement in the code there that governs. So if it's different than what's in the parking requirements for the rest of the city, the parking requirements in the overlay as stated in the overlay district will govern.
Is the timing of, we just deferred the last project, and I assume that we're going to have other projects coming before us before this issue is put to rest. How do we deal with those?
So, it's completely up to the commission if you feel comfortable moving these on and taking a vote on it, or whether you want to have more discussion about it, or if you want us to do anything additional or answer any additional questions and bring them back to you on your next meeting. We're happy to do that. So it's completely up to the commission.
We could go ahead and move this on to January 9th. We have a public hearing.
Yes.
And then we could take action on it.
Yes.
So after reviewing, that would be the next step, and then it would go on up the chain if it's passed or move forward, right?
One other question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you clarify, so accessory use, we're getting rid of that, that's great. I've always felt that kind of applied to the mom and pop kind of shop, right? So what happens if somebody wants to rehab an upper level, a second level on an existing commercial property on the hill?
Rehab
To
or
provide
add?
parking?
Yeah, so if there was upper floor space currently that's not already being used for residential and somebody wanted to convert it into residential, this parking code would require them to find parking for those spaces. Now, if it's already there, they're grandfathered in and nothing needs, there's no parking requirement for those
existing.
residential uses.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I have seen in other codes that try to encourage, there's a lot of Main Street buildings in a lot of communities where they have a really tough time getting the upper floors to be used. They're left vacant because they're harder to use. And as an incentive to allow them to get the upper floor used, they've exempted the upper floors in an existing buildings from parking requirements. So, I mean, that is something we could add to this if that's the desire of the commission to do that.
I'm in big favor of that instance right there. You've got a business owner like Dave that if his building, if he wanted to add a second floor to it, he's got no chance. If he wants to make an improvement to the hill, redesign his building, he would have no place to park his upper floor tenants. So I'm in favor of.
So we can write it so that it's within an existing building. So it would take an existing floor and allow that to be exempt from parking requirements. We can also say that up to 1 story above, commercial space would be exempted from parking requirements. So there's a number of different ways we could do it. What you're talking about, Brian, is adding a story. I don't know if some of those buildings could actually support another story, but I guess what I was initially talking about was just existing space within a building that's not currently being used for residential, being converted to residential.
I'm just worried that handcuffs anybody that's got a current building that wants to do something, that now they just can't. In that zone that's supposed to be dense, and whether or not it's required currently, arguable.
Or if it's a small lot.
Right.
And maybe it's even a new building.
And
is
you've got
there a
that whole-
certain 1 or 2 units, a 2-story building that don't require parking? I don't know, but I think it'd be great to have some room for those kinds of situations.
Because you've got that whole corridor of the hill turning west towards Urban Flats. If that Copyworks building ever changes, that's a major.
I would think if you could do it kind of how you had suggested, maybe anything existing or 1 additional floor.
Why limit it to 1 additional floor, though, if a building would need to be torn down for structural reasons or damage?
Well, if you got
Likely thing it'd get
to
replaced
tear it
with.
down, you're going to have to meet the requirements for new, right?
And that's what I'm afraid of, though, is that those buildings are so old. And eventually, somebody, whether it's now or 20 years from now.
I think it's the issue of density. We want to go back to what we have now, right? Which is somebody building 12 stories without any
Or
parking.
4.
Right. You
so-
kind of run that risk again then.
Yeah, so it's how dense we feel, what feels right.
I mean, ostensibly, if a building was burned down or tore down to redevelop, there would be an opportunity at that point in time to design the building to have a few parking spaces on the lower level tucked behind the commercial space. It really depends on the particular lot in question and whether you want to allow that flexibility, or whether you just want to have an amendment to allow it for conversion of upper floor space into residential at this point in time for existing buildings.
I think the safer thing would be just to say conversion of existing space, because that's going to be there's a limit on what that is. It doesn't potentially open up another controversy, on other things.
I would like to address what Kyle brought up, that one lot is always full and one lot is not because it's required paid parking. Can we fix that?
Well, that's all part of the parking study and managing the public parking supply.
Well, I think that's important because everybody wants free parking. And if I'm a resident, maybe I decide I'm going to rent one of Brent's new beautiful bedrooms, and I'm going to have a roommate because I can't afford the rent. We both have cars. One of us gets a stall and one of us doesn't. I want free parking. My partner will probably want free parking. So unless we deal with that, that's what we're going to have.
Lots, I believe one of them has a time limit on it. The other one has parking meters in it. I can't tell you what the history of that or why one's different than the other one. You can also purchase a parking permit from the city for $20 a month, and you're able to park in the parking lots. So that would be a solution for residents that don't have a parking space that could then basically use the public parking lot for parking. But I think that is beyond the scope of what we can do here with obviously this is about the zoning ordinance itself. Yeah. And talking about the policies that the city has for their public parking lots is important. That's really not something the commission can.
We can directly address.
Have a discussion about it during the parking study, but that's not something we can resolve at the commission level.
I understand that, but if there are not enough parking spaces in my building where I live, I will go find a spot. I have to find a spot to park my car. And as Mr. Geisler said, he gets people in his lots all the time that don't belong there. So I'm just saying it's the nature of the beast. It's, you know.
Right, and so that's why you would do a parking study to figure out what are the solutions to some of the issues that people are having in the area.
I agree.
Maybe at this time it'd be, the commission is willing to open this up for any public comments on this proposal. Invite anybody in the public that would like to comment, name and address.
Yeah, Brent Dahlstrom, 5016 Samantha Circle. Thanks again. First of all, I think it's great that we're trying to get some type of amicable bridge so that maybe some projects can continue on and while we figure out the actual facts. Because right now we're going to have two sides that are going to argue forever without facts, and that's done no good for anybody up to this point. One of the things that I want to start to at least everyone understand is that in the last 40 years on College Hill, we've had 3 buildings built, right, in the C3. And none of those 3 would have been approved under this code, okay? So we have an area that's been deemed blighted, and I'm not arguing that we should change that. I just would like a different bridge. But if we're trying to, like Dave said, we need growth, and most of us business owners believe that we do need growth. If we're creating a code that actually just the one that I've proposed tonight would have fit under that, under this code, that I think we're creating something that will mean that we don't have any more projects. So Ms. Soul and Mr. Leeper said, well, how many more projects will come before us before we change it? The answer is none, okay? So the C3 area on College Hill is smaller than the entire State Street project that Mark Kittrell just did, okay? That's how limited our space is. And then if you take into account what is in the floodplain within C3, which FEMA's just proposed a new map, and I'll send that to everyone, the 40% of the College Hill overlay district will be in the floodplain starting in 2019, okay? 40%, all the way up to 21st Street. So just a little bit past Bonnie's is floodplain. So Dr. Sire's building's completely in the floodplain. Hidden Valley wouldn't be allowed to be built today because that has parts in the floodplain. So we now have all this area that can't be built, okay? Because within Cedar Falls Code, you can't build in the floodplain. So my thought is, why not, we talked about, and Karen brought up, don't use our valuable land for parking. Why not consider do one-to-one, maybe even provide some visitor. I don't even care if we could make some parking lots in this floodplain, because those buildings are getting old and unsightly. And if it was blighted 10 years ago, it's blighted even more so today. So make it have pavers, make it have bioswales, do something, but create this area where us as developers, since there's such a limited C3, to provide this parking. College students, maybe within 300 feet, 400 feet, something reasonable. Today, they're parking over in by the dome and walking over to the dorm, so I don't think it's outside the question to walk a little bit away. If we go forward with this, which is great today, this is the end. So I need everyone to understand, this will be the last project approved. We don't have any land. So the other option is, and Marty, you talked about this before, is expand the C3, right? I don't think it's correct that residential can't be on the first floor because I own a building in the C3 with residential on the first floor. So I don't think that is currently correct. That's downtown Cedar Falls. But we might need to look at that. But let's utilize our assets. If we can't develop on 40%, now Becky and Dave, they live on College Hill, so the last thing we want is these massive parking lots right next to the residents too, right? So within reason, it has to be in certain areas, it has to be thought of. And one of my frustrations, coming up here for 3 years straight now, is that we have had no interaction with the university. We've had no interaction really with College Hill Partnership. We had no interaction with the students to bring everyone together and discuss the problem all at once. And so please, if we're going to do a parking study, please bring all stakeholders in and let everyone discuss this issue. The other thing it does, if you are allowing these other parking lots, is it does raise the value of everyone else. So there's all these houses that are non-conforming, and with this rule, it makes every single building except maybe Dr. Sires and Hidden Valley non-conforming uses if they have residential anywhere in College Hill. If we allow these off-site parking lots, it starts to bring value to those. And I just think that we should think a little more broadly than this very, very small area of requiring all this valuable land to be where the parking is at. So it's my perspective. I'd love to hear what everyone's thought about that, but I'm not saying no to parking. I'm just saying maybe we should think about where we can place it. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. Anyone else who would like to offer some comments on this?
Ishan Vajpayee, 3831 Convair Lane. I want to start by saying that I'm flattered to be considered some sort of competition with my one rental in Cedar Falls, but in any event, I also, I'm sure everyone takes issue with some things I say, but I also take issue with some kind of the implication that we don't want to see anything built, don't want to see something done, don't want to add more. There's a certain element of town, I think I was implied to be part of that doesn't want development. Absolutely false. In fact, this conversation about the code is exactly what we've been trying to talk about this whole time, is don't try and wedge a development up against the code that says it's illegal. Do something to accommodate the development and the density you want to see. Don't just say, well, we want to see density, and we don't care if the code doesn't accommodate for it. We're going to make our own decision that density is good. You got to let this go through the process. If density is good and this parking ratio is good, it'll come through you, it'll go through city council, and it'll be passed as law. That's all. I mean, I'm not an obstructionist. That's all we've been asking for, is that the law come forward first and then the projects later for equal treatment of everybody involved. And so then that goes to the timing, where I understand that, there's this split over whether to table or whether to defer. But what are we going to talk about at the next meeting since it's been deferred? The code is going to be the same on January 9th as it is today. And that's just my comment on the timing, is let's take a breath, let this play out. And if you defer the site plan anticipating that this code is going to change, well, you're just assuming, really, it's a usurpation of the role of city council. You're assuming that council's going to pass this through. I don't care if they do or don't, but I don't see how this commission can assume that something's going to get passed through city council and then make decisions on site plans based on that assumption. And that's all I have.
Anybody else would like to offer their thoughts on this?
So the observation I guess I'd like to make from that is to say we would like to put residential on the first floor where there's commercial in a mixed-use building, and then in the next sentence to say, but we need to expand the commercial land available for development, are contrary statements. If a developer isn't insane, he doesn't probably want to build a lot of commercial space in the College Hill area, because there's a captive audience of 11,000 kids, but after bars and restaurants and places to get their hair cut, there's not so very much demand for that. So I guess the point I would make about those two statements being contrary to each other is that it seems to me that a mixed-use building becomes a Trojan horse at some point and just allows you to develop high-density residential in a commercial zone. And the College Hill overlay currently says that residential is to be discouraged. So I think a person should be aware of that. The other thing I just like to say is that college students have budgets, and they're fairly tight. I think 60%, I read this, 60% of UNI students are from the area. And, you know, we're not San Diego or these other places where everyone's rich. So the people that we see in our buildings, when they have a one-bedroom, they're usually a couple. And the studios are usually a couple. And that's because $600 a month begins to be more than they can really afford. And so the fact of the matter is that one-bedrooms, at least 50% of the time and probably higher, have more than two people. And studios, you know, it may be half or less than half, but when you put one person per bedroom and call a studio a one-bedroom and one-bedroom, you're going to have a lot more students than you think you're going to have because of the budget. And that's why if you look around town, a lot of these rent by the bedrooms are $400 because that's about what they can afford. And then the top two-bedroom is $800. But in between, there are those people who couple up or things like that. So I would urge you to look at whether one parking space per bedroom really works. It should, if it was 1.5, you'd come closer. And then you're eliminating visitors. So keep that in mind, because there really was, you know, visitor parking, which was for every over five, you know, when people living there, then you had to have one of those. So I think you should be at 1.5 to, you know, maybe 1 3/4 for a one-bedroom. When it gets to 2 and 3, well, then that usually takes care of itself, because they're not living as couples then. They're each occupying a bedroom. But the one-bedrooms are unique, that these kids really do have a budget, and they're going to be more than one. It's going to be at least 1.5 at the very least. And then if you figure that you've cut out the visitor spaces, you're probably at 1.75 to do anything reasonable. Otherwise, they will spill into city parking. And I don't want to talk any longer, but I do want to say this. The original proposal that was brought was 100 parking spaces short, and it seemed to go through. I mean, I was shocked, because when you finally reach the critical mass and put these people out in the street, they take up 150 parking spaces rapidly if the first bump is 100 of them. So I'm very happy with what has happened with this process. It has brought us to, you know, a livable and nice-looking complex that the area will survive from. But if you underpark and then, you know, a lot more units go online, you're gonna fill up all the parking spaces that are now city spaces. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Sires. Others? All right. forward and state your name and address.
Ryan Kreener, 4407 Donald Drive in Cedar Falls. I just want to talk about this area isn't just for college students. We're trying to make this for everybody in Cedar Falls. College Hill Partnership has been working for how many years? 15, 20 years? 10. Not only just aimed at college students. We want this to be a vibrant place for everybody. Post-college, families even. Bring your kids. It's not just bars, it's not just gas, it's for everything. So have that vision for future on expanding C3 maybe. That's big zone, but college students are the main drivers maybe, but we want everybody in Cedar Falls. We want people from Waterloo. It's a welcome area. So keep the vision wide and vibrant. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Kamyar and Cheyenne, 1703 Washington, president of the College Hill Partnership. I ask one specific question of you, which is to recommend to the City Council to immediately do the parking study. And we have sent a letter to this effect. And I also have a couple of, which is not just a parking study, but as Mr. Dahlstrom mentioned, all these other possibilities, not just one little thing. We really need more planning. That's really a planning thing, not just a zoning thing. So the question I have is, in front of us, we had this wonderful study, a wonderful proposal to build this multiplex. And really, I didn't hear, I noticed two of the members spoke and explained your reason why you supported it, but nobody else did. So as an ordinary person sitting there saying, wait a minute, a good proposal was proposed, staff recommended approval, and we heard all kinds of threat of lawsuit and everything, and nobody asked the staff what's their comeback to the ideas that presented, and whether usually when I serve on the Planning and Zoning Commission for the county, and if there is a legal issue, the attorney is there to kind of rebuttal the accusation that you're going to make a bad decision, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, it's your recommendation to the council and your sense of interpretation of this. But as an ordinary person sitting here, I didn't hear a whole lot of discussion. All I heard was, for no particular reason, a good proposal was just put on delayed. So I'm just posing a question: why wasn't staff asked for their ideas to further elaborate on this?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
There was some comments that College Hill Partnership discourages residential development in that overlay. Is that an older thought, wording in the overlay, or is that something you guys are looking at changing, amending, since you guys are recommending a sizable?
Repeat your question about residential.
Somebody in opposition.
As a College Hill Partnership, we encourage all sorts of development that's allowed within the overlay, right?
Perfect.
There is residential, there's multiplexes, there's commercial.
So there's nothing in there that actually says residential is discouraged?
Yeah, actually there is. If you read the code, it says College Hill overlay discourages residential.
So I could probably clarify that.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's several different zoning districts, underlying zoning districts within College Hill. Everything, there's some R3, there's some R4, I believe there's some R2, and then there's the business district, which is C3. So in the portion of the code that talks about the business district, which is just the C3, it talks about discouraging, it allows a multi-dwelling buildings to be considered, but what the language says is it discourages that because there's only a limited amount of space that's allowed in the C3 district.
Main floor.
So that it encourages mixed-use buildings in that particular zone.
So
So
then
there's R3 and R4 zones flanking that C3 district that allows multi-dwelling buildings.
The thing that confused me was then we had opposition talking about how somebody would be crazy to put commercial in that district. it just doesn't really make sense. We've got people that don't like the project for its residential, but then they call somebody crazy to put commercial in that same district. There's a lot of back and
I
forth
think
on
the
that.
code allows the market to respond.
Right.
And I think we need to
Absolutely.
make sure the code is not written in a way that is counter to what the market.
Well, usually the biggest problem we have is commercials anywhere. Nobody wants commercial anywhere, and so protecting those areas that allow commercial tend to be, the code tends to want to try to protect those because, it doesn't matter where the project is, somebody's going to come object if in a commercial zone. It just, it's just kind of how it works.
Yeah. May I address his comment about us not asking staff for whatever? We have asked this question. This has been on the table for a year and a half, 2 years. So we've already asked those questions. We know what staff thinks, right? They're recommending these things. And you have said city attorney interprets it this way. He's not here for us to ask him directly, but I just wanted to comment.
Yeah, so at the last time that there was a development proposal, we decided not to go back through that whole analysis again, but we laid out all the reasons that staff believes that the code should be interpreted the way that we've interpreted it, and that's why the recommendation was brought to you in that form. So rather than try to go back, I'm sure you all recall those arguments, and rather to replay that, we just have kept our recommendation consistent with our interpretation of what the zoning ordinance says.
We've had a great deal of discussion on these items. Anyone else who would like to comment on this proposed zoning code text amendments?
Andy Footman from 422 North Ellen Street, and just once again would like to ride the hobby horse for making sure that Sidecar Coffee stays legal in the future. So I'm such a big fan of what's happened there, and overall, I think, I really appreciated what you said. You guys are here volunteering your time. I mean, it's a lot of time. I only come once every long time, and you guys are here all the time, and I really appreciate what you're doing. And it's really important because, things change really fast on College Hill. I read a newspaper article 5 years ago before we started that said just what we've heard said again tonight, that it would be crazy to start a business on College Hill. That it would be, that the situation up there was impossible, and there's many people that believed that at the time, and there was one guy who did it, and he went and showed that really, with a lot of optimism and hard work, you can not only get those 11,000 awesome college kids, but all the people in the community, many people in the community, and I would like everybody to know College Hill is a great place to be. And you should all come down and check it out. It's not just for students. And there's plenty of parking. But all that is to say, we're in a time, and the time is going to change. 5 years ago, you would have been crazy to start a business on College Hill, and then we did, and it worked out fine. And 5 years from now, there may not be a person who's standing here willing to come to these meetings for 3 years to try to build a building. There's lots of places that are very happy to build a big building. And lots of little college towns that would love to have somebody and say, hey, I'd like to spend a huge amount of money and put a beautiful building right next to your campus that's going to have cool businesses in the bottom and the way people want to live now upstairs. I mean, it's not like there's just constantly people beating down the door. So now's the time, and I would really, we're all spending all this time on it. One of my favorite characters in The Incredibles, which I've watched many times, says, fortune favors the bold. And I would really just, that'd be my recommendation to all of us, is that we don't be too timid here. So,
thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
For your words of wisdom. Anyone else who would like to comment on this proposed zoning code text amendment? Dave?
Dave, Campus Street. I just want to thank you for not tabling this, which I think would in effect be a moratorium on building. And I know it's, I've looked at other cities that are dealing with these things, like Champaign, Illinois comes to mind. They're very progressive, and I think they released most of their parking requirements, for new building, period. But we cannot, I know it's dicey, but we need to move forward, and please don't table this, and let's go forward and let it go before the council. I think Kyle said something really important earlier. No matter what we do with parking, we've got 6,000 cars on UNI, right? So when people, it got me thinking, when I have people parking on my property, which is like 10 in the morning, because there's parking, they don't want to pay for it. So they're going up to their class, and that's when they park behind Octopus or Mohair Pear. So that's almost a side issue. They're not going anywhere, and no matter how much parking we add, they're going to be there. So, thank you.
There's been a lot of mixed questions about the timing and about the order of things. Maybe this is just fresh eyes on this being new to this body, but with those outside eyes, I hear about these proposed zoning changes and see where it solves some problems and fixes it and then causes new problems. And then there's talk of a parking study. To me, I think common sense would suggest doing a parking study prior to doing any zoning changes. And if that's obviously going to take some time, I don't think it'd be fair to the project we heard about earlier or any other future project to hold that up for speculative changes to codes. That's my feeling on it.
I'm going to close the public comment at this time. We'll continue any discussions from the commission. I guess I would say, personally, I favor this approach. I think it's a pretty good compromise because I don't think the parking requirement as it exists right now in the code is right for this situation, and for this district. So I think, we don't have all the answers. I agree, but I don't think we can wait around to get the perfect solution. So I think this is a pretty good attempt at doing what I think is probably going to be the right thing. So my feeling is I'd like to continue with this, for the next meeting and see if we take some action on it. That's kind of how I feel. And then if things change, study comes back. The other thing looming is, we're talking about overhauling the whole zoning ordinance in total, right? I mean, that's still kind of that's been out there for a few years. This ordinance has been around since like 1970, so it's kind of tough. Things get broken after a while, and so, I'm really anxious that we would get going on, the total overhaul of our zoning code for the entire city, which can address a lot of these things and really, bring us into the modern day and address things like cell towers and things like that were never envisioned when we had the ordinance was originally written. So, but I think we need to do something now. This has been going on for a long time, and I think I think what you're proposing here is generally is a pretty seems like a pretty fair approach to me, and I'd like to see it continue to move forward.
I agree with you, and I felt like this is what we were going to do last February. We already talked about this last February, looking at this zoning change, and it never happened. And so now it's a year later, we're finally getting to it. So I'm a little disappointed in that it's taken this long. I look forward to getting it done.
I personally think it's too strict still. And then if it goes through and in 10 years, I think we're going to be talking about it again. We could be talking about it again in 6 months or 12 months if we get our parking study, and then we've gone through a zoning change, and then we got to bring it up again.
I would agree with you, but I think it's a good first step.
Yeah, I don't know if it's over-restrictive, but there needs to be a balance, I think, when we're trying to promote a mixed-use building, to make zero requirement for parking is a little extreme, but to be 100% parks, the opposite end of extreme. So it is a happy medium. I just don't know if it's the perfect recipe, but it's a starting point, yes.
Yeah, it's definitely a starting point. You're right. 100% is too extreme, and I would consider what a lot of college towns are doing today not being extreme at all and having zero parking requirements. There are cities and towns across the country doing maximum parking, where you can only park so much. And it's the direction that the country is going and urban areas are going, and that's just my vision and my thought for what other areas are doing.
Is there some direction from the commission that, I heard one thing you wanted us to bring back to you next time was a proposal for allowing some of that second floor use to be exempt from parking requirements. And we'd certainly be willing to look at, a different ratio if you feel like it should be lower. I don't want to open it up completely. We're looking to you for a direction as far as that, but this is what we're bringing forward to you right now as a.
My feeling is I think you've done a pretty good job of trying to balance both sides. There's pretty strong feelings both ways. And I like the fact that it's fairly straightforward and simple to understand, simple to interpret, doesn't leave anything for interpretation, so it's easy to apply. I think that's valuable, and I think it, that's just me. So I'm pretty good with it personally. I don't know.
And I would agree. I think that the fact that the current code is ambiguous has created significant issues for us, and clearing that up and having a straightforward code that is easier to interpret is a good thing. And I think we also have to recognize what are the demographics of the campus that we have here in Cedar Falls. UNI caters to Iowa students, and Iowa students typically come from rural communities, and mom and dad want them to have a car here so they can come home for the weekend. So we need to recognize that we may have a higher percentage of students with cars than some of the other universities around the country.
Well, can you outline the long-term kind of schedule for the overhaul of zoning? Because I think there are some things coming that are, there are serious changes. One is density. If you talk to every major car manufacturer, we're talking about automated vehicles in the next 5 years, right? That's not that far out, which is going to change the story again. So how are we laying out those zoning changes in what kind of time frame?
So what we have, the first step was to do the parking study downtown, and that was intended to then inform the visioning that's planned for the downtown area, and then zoning code update to the downtown area. The intent then is to move on to College Hill and do something similar in College Hill. And then, depending how that process goes, the council will direct zoning to be updated in other areas. And then there may be, it may be a broader brush for some of the outlying areas that are quite similar. But that process hasn't yet been determined. So the first step will be, we have proposals in from some consultants for the downtown visioning and the zoning code update. We've reviewed those proposals and will likely be choosing a consultant soon and forwarding that recommendation to the council. And that process will get started in the new year. We'll have the parking study completed in the downtown. That'll help, inform the zoning for the downtown. And then the idea is to move on to College Hill after that.
One last question. You said you're getting preliminary results back on that study down there in downtown, and they're 40% overparked?
So I'd like to just make sure that everybody knows that the consultant will be coming back into town. Keep your city website will have the date. It hasn't been set yet when the consultant will come back in. He was in town and gave a presentation. Most of that presentation, it's available on the website. If you want to look, if you didn't get a chance to come to the meeting, you can view the presentation on the city's website. Most of that presentation had to do with a survey that was taken, and the survey results, which were a lot what people thought and were feeling about the problems and where the problems were. In the meantime, he's been doing actual counts of where the parking hotspots are and finding out what the actual ratios are. The preliminary results that he did mention for the parking areas behind River Place, the private parking areas, are that the parking is oversupplied for the residents. But I think I would suggest that you wait until the final results to know the exact percentage.
And I was going to compare that to what that is per unit, but that's a different demographic. I understand there's students going to this project and there's mostly out-of-town people going to that project, so it's probably not apples to apples, but I was just curious.
But I think he'll have more specific information about that in the results of the study.
All right. Do you have enough to be dangerous? Any more comments from the commission?
So is the staff going to then propose exemption language for the?
So they've got a basic proposal here, and the intent will be to come back at our next meeting. We'll have a public hearing to discuss it and then potentially take action on it in some form, approve, deny, or.
Between now and then, there could be something worded correctly or differently.
For the upper floor
Yeah.
For the existing.
buildings.
So
So I make sure I understand what you're asking me to do is bring back an exemption for upper floor space in existing buildings. Is that correct?
That'd be my thinking,
I'd like more, but I don't think I have agreement, so yes, that's good.
Get what we can get, right? All right.
Let's do it.
I think that concludes our items of new business. Do we have any commission updates?
Yes.
Karen?
A couple of updates. Just a reminder that the December 26th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting is canceled. It will be rescheduled. It will not be rescheduled just because of the holidays and the fact that you have another meeting coming right up in January. So the next meeting will be January 9th for the commission. And then another update is that on January 7th, the Planning and Zoning Commission is invited to a joint meeting with the City Council to discuss the capital improvements plan. I think that's a yearly joint meeting that you have with the council. That'll be held during the Committee of the Whole meeting prior to the formal council meeting on January 7th. The exact time of the Committee of the Whole meeting has not been yet determined because the agenda for that meeting hasn't yet been set. So we'll be sending out another email invite to all of you, so once we know exactly the time of the meeting. And we'd also want to get a count of how many of you are able to attend that meeting so that we have enough spaces available for everyone to discuss the capital improvements plan.
All right. That's all? Good enough? I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Your second?
Second.
All in favor signify with aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.